To me, coexistence is finding balance. Balance between the needs, desires, and realities of the indigenous communities that have long existed in the Arctic and the many individuals that now call the Arctic home. Finding the balance between traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge, and the balance between the natural environment and the needs of our communities.
To me, coexistence is all about creating harmony in the complex and interconnected relationships between various stakeholders, but also values. And it entails finding a balance between different interests and priorities, while respecting the unique characteristics of the Arctic.
Very closely. You start?
Yes, I'll start. Well, welcome back after lunch. It's great to have you back here on Navigating Arctic Reality. It's great to see you navigated back down from the first floor. What a great lunch again it was. A big thanks to everybody at the hotel for how they've been looking after us.
I do enjoy the lunch, but you know, coming back from all the lunch, it's an issue with all the things we wear. Glad you made it back to the room. I'm glad that you inhaled all the science sessions and then left for lunch and then joined us here for talking more about Arctic shipping, which we know about. You know, it is a very popular topic all over the world, but going down to the nitty-gritty details, it's why we're here in a constructive environment. Like
Absolutely. So we know that Arctic shipping is, of course, evolving. Alternative green fuels. We know that we need better infrastructure to reduce CO2, increase efficiency, and also serve new ports and routes that are potentially opening up as well in the future. So sustainable practices and new technology are absolutely crucial. So we're going to be investigating the new initiatives that are out there to promote greener Arctic shipping and just find out whether they can be accelerated. So to do this, I would like to welcome our first panel onto the stage. So please do give a warm welcome to Charlene Novicheva, who is the Director General of the Directorate General of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries at the European Commission. Welcome, Charlene. Great to have you here. Also, Maria Bartelesian, who is State Secretary for Norway's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stepping in for Cecilia Merseth, Minister of Fisheries and Ocean Policy, who has been delayed, another delay due to flights, but great to have you here, Maria. Also, Dr. Sian Prior, Lead Advisor at the Arctic Clean Alliance. Sian really has had a journey and a half to get here. We did a briefing over Zoom from the airport, so it's fantastic that she's actually made it. So welcome, Sian. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you to have me.
So and finally, I would like to introduce Margrethe Mesvin, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary from the US Bureau of Oceans and International Environment and Scientific Affairs. So really great to have you with us. Welcome, do take a seat. First of all, Charlena, can you just explain how EU policies can really help drive changes and improve the adaptation to greener, cleaner shipping fuels? I mean, what is the EU doing in its work to try and phase out heavy oil? What initiatives are you taking that could help the Arctic region?
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, and let me thank Norway for hosting this very important Arctic Forum every year, and I'm really happy to be able to address you on behalf of the European Union. You know that the European Union is very friendly to sustainable development, so this College of Commissioners, which is the political level of the European Commission, that is on the expiry, but when it started in 2019, started its work 1 week later after they started with the Green Deal. And the Green Deal is the highest horizontal ambition that actually is projected afterwards into many initiatives. The main objective there is to be a carbon neutral continent or European Union by 2050. And for that, many actions are being taken, whether we are talking about a zero pollution action plan, which is exactly linked to stop fossil fuel emissions from all sectors that are doing that, whether we are talking about specific initiatives in transport, and I will mention two of them to remember because there is a huge background to cover. I would not be able to give honor to everything, so that's why I will be focusing on 2-3 maximum initiatives. So one of them is the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy that outlines very nicely what type of focus we're going to put on each and every element so that we can bring more sustainable transport, less polluting, to aspire to a zero pollution. Then we have the Fuel EU, Maritime Mobility, which is an initiative which specifically targets sustainable mobility through concentrating on what type of fuel we need to use. But I would like to also say something about research, because you started by that. If we want to have smart and sustainable solutions, we need technologies. And we have, you know, in the European Union, the biggest international research program in the world, which covers the 7-year period 2021-2027. There is a huge section on Arctic there specifically, and there are many technologies that are going to be covered and supported, from brand new solutions through commercialization to become innovation and ready for market products. And last thing I would like to, probably the last but one, because there was something that happened in December last year, so you are hunting for new elements. There was an agreement on the regulation, it's called TEN-T, a regulation which is Trans-European Networks for the transport, and there was an agreement between the co-legislators. The objective there is to have much higher focus on sustainability in transport. We have corridors there that stretch to the Arctic, for example, the ones that link with the Mediterranean up to the Arctic, Arctic parts of our 3 member states. So it is really a big plethora of things that we are doing, but something that is very close to my heart, and I will end with this, because we cover also common fisheries policy, and whether we have vessels that are flying a flag in the Arctic or in European waters or elsewhere in international waters, we are trying now through a quite systematized initiative to bring the sector into energy transition. And we have launched last year a communication for energy transition for fisheries, aquaculture and processing. And this communication actually came out with a compendium of all the pragmatic existing solutions. Some of them, and many of them, are coming from Norway. Really good solutions for all types of vessels, fisheries vessels, whether they are aged, whether they are small, whether they have one or another fishing gear, so that we can help the transition and accompany the transition for our fishing vessels. And on this last point that I would like to share, we have established Energy Transition Partnership in June, and it mobilized enormous energy, and now we are working on various strands, whether on funding possibilities, the guide came out in the autumn, or on new technologies, which is our next workshop that we are going to undertake with our partners. So, huge landscape from very high and top horizontal down to very pragmatic and concrete initiatives on our side.
Okay, Charlene Verchetha, thank you very much. Let me bring in Mahlet Mesfin to really stress just how important these efforts are. Why is shipping posing such a big challenge for efforts to limit climate change?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you as well for inviting me to be in this discussion. I think, you know, shipping is a really much bigger deal than many people realize when it comes to emissions. If shipping were a country, it would be the 8th largest emitter in the world, and that's on par with economies like Japan and Germany. And so shipping has always really been seen as a challenge to decarbonize, a sector, a hard-to-abate sector. But we know that emissions, they are significant and they are rising, and they are in a trajectory that's incompatible with our goals in the Paris Agreement. And so even just beyond greenhouse gas emissions, shipping contributes to pollution in the marine environment and air pollution, and that's linked to health issues, in particular as it relates to coastal communities. And so shipping, the sustainability of our planet, the lives, the livelihoods of people on the planet, these are all interconnected. And so, you know, shipping is a challenge for multiple reasons, but I think that the last few years have really proved that we're making progress, and they provided us with some reasons to be more optimistic. You know, we're really in this critical decade where we must keep the 1.5 Celsius degree within reach, and we must continue to work with to raise global ambition and to work with other countries, including major emitters, to accelerate our reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The shipping sector is a critical part of that as well. So.
Okay, thank you. It's great to start with some reasons to be cheerful. Well, let me bring in Maria Vartressian. Just what is needed from the Norwegian and Arctic perspective to ensure both safe and secure development? Why is this pretty high on the priority list?
Well, thank you for this question. It's very important. And just allow me to, first of all, say that the topic, the title of this very panel, Navigating Arctic Realities, well, it's a great title because climate change is an Arctic reality. And the fact of that, the reality of that, is that climate change doesn't care about borders. It doesn't care about geopolitics. What climate change cares about is, as has been addressed by the two previous speakers, is action to cut emissions and to adapt to the changes in the environment. And here in the Arctic, we can think about the Arctic as actually a window into the future, which shows us the effects that climate change is driving. It's warming 4 times faster than anywhere else on average in the world. So with this in mind, it is important to think about when new sailing routes, when new opportunities are opening up due to climate change. It's really a two-edged sword, because it's true that melting ice is opening up new routes, new potential for resources, but it is also exposing very vulnerable marine ecosystems to more activity. Another reality of that, which leads me to answering your question, is the reality for fishing. Resources are changing, moving, disappearing. This affects the communities, the livelihoods, the people depending on that, fisheries. And it's an uncertainty which needs to be addressed. For shipping, when we're thinking about developing green shipping in this region, we need to take into account the fact that we're lacking infrastructure. We're lacking the infrastructure needed to support, to make the sailing routes which are opening up safe for operation. If an accident happens in the Arctic, it might take a long time for help to reach the lives, to save the lives. and of course also to avoid environmental disasters. And also knowledge and the lack of knowledge is a part of this reality. For ocean, there is so much we don't know. And filling the blank spaces, the gaps, is important in order to balancing right the preservation, the conservation with the sustainable use. And so what is really needed is to have all of the stakeholders at the table and to listen to them. What is based from their perspective is a sustainable way forward, solutions from the perspectives of the people who we want to be a part of the transition. And so, I would love to elaborate further also on what it will take, but it's investment, research, development, and scaling with the people and the knowledge at the core.
Well, we'll get into more of that in a bit more detail in a moment, but somebody who's always trying to fill gaps in knowledge is Sian Prior, a lead advisor at the Clean Arctic Alliance. So Sian, really just give us a rundown on what the impact of black carbon emissions from ships in the Arctic really are, and what are the concrete steps that you want to see taken to try and reduce that contribution to the climate crisis?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel as well. As other speakers have said, shipping is contributing significant amounts of both carbon dioxide and also other climate pollutants, including black carbon. Black carbon is produced by the incomplete combustion of fossil fuels, particularly oil-based fuels, and it has a double whammy effect in the Arctic. It goes up into the atmosphere where it heats the atmosphere, as other climate pollutants do, but it also then settles out. It's a short-lived climate pollutant, and it settles out quite quickly. If it settles onto snow and ice, it will speed up the melting of the snow and ice. So not only is it speeding up the melting, it's also in doing that exposing areas of land and sea, which are dark in nature, dark in color, which then absorb more heat. And this is called, this is resulting in the destruction of what's known as the albedo effect, the reflectivity of the polar regions. Shipping, unfortunately, is responsible, it depends on how far north you go, but as you get further and further north, shipping is responsible for a big proportion of the black carbon that is entering the atmosphere and settling out onto snow and ice. It's not only shipping, it's coming from further south as well, but shipping is a significant contribution. This has been recognized for some time now, but in over a decade, the discussions around what to do have focused around what is black carbon and how to measure black carbon, and we've yet to take any form of regulation to reduce ships' emissions of black carbon. Most other sectors are actively reducing the emissions, and the Arctic Council has actually set itself a target which is on course to meet to reduce emissions across the board by 2025, between 25% and 33% by 2025. But shipping emissions in the last decade in the Arctic have increased. They've doubled. This is partly because of the amount of shipping going to the Arctic, the fact that it's increasing, and it's spending more time in Arctic waters. There are a number of ways in which we can reduce this, and frustratingly, we could reduce it really, really quickly. One of the simplest solutions would be to simply switch from the very heavy fuel oils that are still routinely used in much of the shipping industry to lighter distillate fuels. Distillate fuels are not clean, but they are cleaner than the heavy residual fuels. And I find it amazing in this day and age that we're talking about moving a sector from a type of fuel that is so dirty that we feel diesel is better. But that's what we're talking about. If we move to these cleaner fuels, then we can also do other things like install particulate filters. Again, technology that has been used on land for a long time now, but is new still to the shipping industry. So those are the two main things that I think we need to see done. We need the shipping industry that's operating in and near to the Arctic to move to cleaner fuels quickly. That could be done within a very short space of time. And then we need to then look at what else can be done on top of that to bring black carbon levels down even further.
Okay, thanks very much, Sian. Well, let me pick up on a few of those points. I mean, Charlene, should the EU take into account more the needs of the Arctic in particular in its regulatory work? Because you see there's always need to really accelerate efforts to reduce the emissions of black carbon in the Arctic are so much more crucial in this region than perhaps elsewhere to try and limit climate change. Can there be a kind of two-speed approach, and can you see the Arctic as a special case? If not, why not?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's not easy as always because the scope of our legislation covers the European Union, equally also the Arctic part of our member states. But we have specific initiatives, and I will immediately mention our latest review of the Arctic policy strategy. It was issued in 2021, and there we have some bold ambitions, for example, really to ban the heavy fuel oils for navigation in the Arctic. And there, of course, we are prepared to work with IMO because we are not a single player. We need an international engagement, and if everybody is behind such an initiative, we are one of those that would like to help. The other one is, and I will come from what you said, Sean, about the Black Carbon Initiative. Actually, the European Union, I used to work in the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and I know about this project, which has been taken up and it deepens and widens throughout its development. So with this one, we want to increase the understanding of the black carbon, the sources, and we want to address them and find, most importantly, the best smart solutions to Sean was quite eloquent in mentioning some of the ways of doing that. So in this respect, we have some specific focus, or for example, our plea that the fossil carbon has to stay in where it is in the Arctic and not to be extracted. So there are many ways we can do that. But at the same time, we have to be horizontally covering Europe. By the way, Europe is so close to the Arctic that anything that will limit the emissions and the pollution will be beneficial to the Arctic.
Well, let me, just bringing you again, Maria Valtryssian, I just want to find out whether actually Norway should be putting the Arctic's case to the EU and the IMO in stronger ways, you know, with the EU through the EEA, for example. Do you think there should be Arctic exceptions?
You know, I'm very happy that you're mentioning the EEA. It's currently celebrating 30 years. We're very happy to celebrate that. It's an important agreement for us. And it's also our main link to the European Union and collaboration there. And Charlina has mentioned the European Green Deal. It's the green engine driving climate policies which are inspiring the rest of the world. The IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, is also, and all of that is contributing to a green shift in the market. And it's really important to see how can we scale and speed up the development on the demand side. Because one thing is what we are producing currently, which is oil and gas based. The energy systems of the world are fossil. They need to go to renewable. This is the promise all of the countries have given at COP28 and the Paris Agreement. And from the Norwegian side, I mean, the transition is happening now. It's important to contribute to making it go faster, to making sure that it's just and effective. And if it's not those two things, it will not happen. So we need to think of how to scale up, speed up, and make sure it is creating value for all stakeholders involved. Take, for example, development of hydrogen or ammonia, together with many other countries and on a joint initiative with the United States. We joined the Clyde Bank Declaration at the COP26. There is also a zero-emission shipping mission, many international initiatives which aim at the same thing, and that is to help the most, I think, the most global, the most international type of business activity, which has been going on for the longest time ever, to transition. And imagine all of the knock-on effects that will have. And developing different technologies, different business opportunities to build the new renewable value chains, which will employ many, many people. And so to help drive that, we need to pull all of the best resources we have across different countries, which can help build up the production, distribution, the use of those new technologies and to really cut the emissions.
Well, we're going to be delving into that a little bit later in Heat 2 of the panel, but
And
just
my
about
point
some
is-
of the problems
and just
there is with that in itself.
But there cannot be any exception. The transition is happening now. And different regions have different opportunities to taking part in it. A lot has been said about the Nordic region. There are a lot of Nordic similarities, also a lot of Nordic differences, and the circumpolar similarities, differences, which can really, if we put them in a good sequence, it can help drive the transition we need in a just and effective way. So the main point is that there cannot be any exceptions because this is happening. We just need to get aboard the train, which is leaving the station.
Well, let me bring in Sian. Sian, there's clearly a need to accelerate efforts. Are there some potential shortcuts whereby, for example, there could be legislative options, different EU regulation that could be used to ensure that the Arctic is seen in some ways as a special case because of the danger that you've pointed out?
Yes, and clearly it's been mentioned, we need global regulation through the International Maritime Organization. Ideally, that is the best place because then that will affect all of the ships wherever they're operating and whoever they are flagged by. And we've got to bear in mind, we're not just talking about European flagships or Arctic country flagships, but we're talking about ships coming or flagged by Liberia and the Marshall Islands, Bahamas. So international regulation is fundamental. However, there is also the opportunity for regional and national regulation as well. Regionally, it's a hypothesis at the moment, but there's an awful lot of ships operating in the Arctic that access the Arctic from European ports, EU ports. And it is possible through the Maritime Fuel EU regulation as a possibility or as an example that a measure could be introduced that would require those ships to not use the heavier fuels while they're operating in the Arctic. It's not in that regulation at the moment, but it's something that we believe could be introduced in the future. And there will be an opportunity quite soon in the coming 2 or 3 years to review that regulation and to start maybe adding some extra regulations in there to address black carbon.
This question really does tie into what you're saying. A question to you. What do you think needs to happen on different levels to allow quicker science-based action locally, nationally and internationally? Should you wait for the global agreements, or do you think you need to be pushing the envelope everywhere?
I think we have to push the envelope everywhere. We can't wait for global agreement. We've waited 13, 14 years for the IMO to think about black carbon, to try and work out what it is and how to measure it. We've got to start taking action. And Norway is coming forward now with a proposal this year for a new emission control area in Norwegian waters. Canada is doing the same in Canadian waters. So there are things that can be done that will make a difference at a domestic level. And we need the regional action as well, and the international action. So we need all of it.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me bring you back in, Madam Esfin. Which green initiatives in particular do you think really should be pursued to help meet these collective goals? Is it those emission-specific areas that Sian's just been talking about? What else should be on the agenda?
Well, I also want to highlight the work of the IMO because I do think it's important to consider and the progress that was made in July with the updated greenhouse gas strategy. I think that that included some targets and some ambitious goals, and I think it was a really important step for the shipping industry and the sector because emissions from this sector was not a part of the Paris Agreement. So I did want to give a shout out to the IMO. But beyond that, there's also just a really growing movement around establishing green shipping corridors. So they're not going to achieve zero emission overnight, but taking steps to fully decarbonize the sector is a series of steps and actions that can take place over time. So when we think about sort of the things and the requirements that we would want to see in order the steps to get to zero emissions in the maritime transportation, there are kind of 4 elements. We need innovation at a massive scale. So that's innovation as it relates to low and zero emission. fuels, that's energy efficient technologies, that's even software to help thinking about voyage planning better. So that's innovation is critical. We need enabling policies at the local and the federal level that help to catalyze efforts and help to incentivize action on a time scale that's as soon as possible, because these are so urgent issues. We need stakeholder engagement, and that's critically important to help ensure that the strategies that are being developed take into account sort of the priorities and the goals of the near port communities. And then fourth would say that we need regular, transparent information sharing, and that should be inclusive of all stakeholders that are part of this ecosystem. So I just say in the United States, we have our green shipping efforts are focused on the Green Shipping Challenge, which we were proud to launch in partnership with Norway at COP27. And at COP in Dubai this past September, we co-hosted an event also with Norway and used that to help drive some new commitments around these activities and efforts. And so over the course of the challenge since 2023, it's resulted in over 80 major commitments around new and existing initiatives, around stakeholder engagement, and that's inclusive of over 50 countries, ports, and major industry stakeholders. And so it's not just the Green Shipping Challenge that's kind of bringing this high-level attention to green shipping efforts. And our ocean conference this year, which is going to be hosted by Greece, they've identified green shipping as one of their priorities. So it'll be another great opportunity for the global community to, whether it's countries or private sector or other stakeholders, to get together to think about the ambitious action that we could make in advancing progress in green shipping corridors. And then finally, I'd just say that, at least in our experience, the shipping industry has been quite ambitious itself in thinking and helping lead the way to these innovative solutions. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that there's a great amount of and an increasing amount of collective action as we all work together on these shared challenges.
Okay, thank you. And just on that point of the green shipping, though, what are the specific challenges of the Arctic that might delay the introduction of such initiatives? Because it's not a one-size-fits-all, is it? And do you think there's enough that's really been thought about in that respect?
Yeah, it is absolutely a challenge, and as sea ice continues to decline, it's going to create a more dynamic environment. You're going to have gradual opening of new shipping routes. You're going to have challenges in access and navigation, and sort of the potential likelihood of increased accidents. And so there's a host of challenges. I would point to infrastructure, though, as one of the key pieces here, in ensuring that we think about expanding maritime infrastructure in the Arctic. I think that's one of the key things to consider. I'd also say, as we think about our work, and we're still working on expanding efforts on green shipping corridors in the Arctic, whether it's Alaska or other parts of the Arctic, I think it's important for us to ensure that these corridors really take into account and respect the different and the challenging operating conditions that do exist in this polar environment. At the same time, really understanding the sensitivity and of the unique Arctic marine ecosystem.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question that's come in for Chalina Vicheva. Why is the EU holding on to be emission-free by 2050, while scientists found out that the tipping point might happen in the next few years? Shouldn't the goal be more ambitious?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Actually, we have been accelerating targets all the time. And it is a kind of dichotomy, because as Maria rightly said, it's a transition. So you can't dump something on the ones that have to implement and achieve the targets if it is not feasible and if the transition is not possible to happen in such deadlines. Then it can have a knock-off effect. So it's really a very well measured way of how your ambition will be productive instead of being counterproductive. Because you see that the transition is not easy. They are vulnerable communities. They have to be accompanied. There is a lot of funding that is needed in order to transform and embark on the transition. But in the end, what is the most important is that we are accelerating all the time the targets. Now we have some targets that up until 2030, because we shouldn't keep in mind only 2050. So the interim targets are very important, and we are at the moment discussing internally for the Commission what to propose to the Member States for another intermediate period, which is 2040. So what will happen between 30 and 40. So we are accelerating, and we will be accelerating as much as we can, because there is no point of giving promises and demonstrate ambition that is actually unachievable. So we are there. If you have better ideas of how we can accelerate, and if we discover better technologies to do it, believe me, we are going to do it earlier.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlene. Now, we've got a lot of input from right across this conference, a huge amount of in-person involvement at the science sessions in particular, and they've been posing lots of different questions. So I'd like to show you one of the questions in this video now, very pertinent question from the Science Session Committee for this panel.
My name is William Copeland. I'm a researcher at the Norwegian Meteorological Institute Ice Service, and I'm one of the co-leads for this session, Navigating the Changing Arctic, Innovative Solutions for Sustainable Maritime Development.
My name is Benjamin Strong. I'm the United States Head of Delegation to the Arctic Council Emergency Prevention, Preparedness and Response Working Group, and I'm a co-lead as well. Our question is, it's been widely reported that vessels have been entering the polar area that do not meet the IMO Polar Code. How are you dealing with arguably unenforceable maritime regulations in their polar areas to keep that area safe?
Mehmet Bessemer, could you answer that? So obviously this is a very tricky issue. What can be done to keep the area safe if that is happening?
Well, I think just want to make the point that the polar code requirements, they are structured to be implemented and enforced in the same way as all IMO requirements. And so we should look at whether the requirements are being implemented effectively, absolutely. And I think that's a continual and it's an ongoing process. But I would say that a key to effective implementation is really sharing of information that enables the parties to be able to ensure that there is safety in Arctic shipping. So that's sharing information among ports, port states and flag states. That's sharing information between port states and regional port state inspection agreements. There's a good example of a body that can help facilitate information sharing in the Arctic Shipping Best Practice Forum, which is a collaboration between the IMO and the Arctic Council's working group on the protection for Arctic marine environment. And so, I think as we think about the importance, absolutely, of keeping the area safe, we really should focus on the regular types of information sharing that is required among the actors that have roles to implement the obligations of the Polar Code. So that's how I would answer that.
Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just to pick up on a few of the points, I'm very happy that Polar Code is mentioned, because for Norway it's immensely important. We're very much dedicated to making sure that the Polar Code is being followed. I think the most important thing is to use the existing structures, IMO, Arctic Council, to making sure it is actually being followed. And for Norway, taking into account that approximately 80% of the Arctic shipping is happening in our waters, it is extremely important to make sure that people on those vessels have the competence to make sure it's safe and sustainable. And just if you allow very, very briefly on the discussion about targets and what year to reach them by, I think we're too hung up in high enough targets and deadlines for them. The most important thing is to make sure we have the policies, the tools, that our toolkits are fully suited in order to actually walk the talk of the green transition. And the main point of climate policy is that it has to be more profitable to invest in green solutions than in the fossil fuel solutions. And it's easier if we do it together.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me bring in Sian here. We talk about the toolkit, making sure you've got the right tools in your kit to approach this. what are the limitations, in your view, when it comes to management of shipping in the Arctic in respect of the Polar Code?
Well, first of all, I think it's important, as others have done, to recognise that the Polar Code is an important regulatory framework. It was innovative in its time when it was first adopted, but that is now 10 years ago, and it's been in effect for 7 years, and we need to start learning lessons from it. There are challenges around its implementation and enforcement. There are areas that people are really struggling with what they mean and how to enforce them, and there's probably more guidance needed. One of the areas we've been particularly concerned, well, a couple of the areas we've been particularly concerned about, that the reports that there are ships that are entering the Arctic without being certified as polar ships is very worrying. The Polar Code was developed originally for cargo vessels and for passenger vessels. Only around 50% of the shipping in the Arctic falls under those two descriptions. A lot of the shipping in the Arctic is what we call non-SOLAS vessels. This is ships that don't qualify under or don't fall under the Safety of Life at Sea Convention. Fishing vessels, private yachts, and I don't just mean yachts with sails, but large motorized yachts. Small cargo vessels under 500 gross tons. None of these actually fall under the Polar Code. Some guidance has been developed, but what it is appearing is that some of these vessels are now trying to use the guidance that sat alongside the Polar Code to determine where it was safe for them to operate, but it wasn't devised for them in the first place. So there are some things we do need to go back and look at again to make sure that it really is effective, both its enforcement and implementation enforcement, but also where the gaps are. And some of the other gaps in there form around the environmental protection measures. You know, the regulation of black carbon, it could have been included in the Polar Code and it wasn't. The regulation of underwater noise, a whole range of different pollutants that are produced by ships that weren't adequately addressed. So it's good and it does need to be enforced, but I think it could be improved and we need to do more.
And perhaps need to do more, particularly right now. There's a couple of questions that have coming in about how Arctic container shipping is expected to increase over the next half century as the sea ice melts. Have we considered the consequences of debris pollution? And another, with the knowledge that we have about how shipping damages the environment, should we even allow the opening of new shipping routes in the Arctic? Do you want to take that question? I mean, obviously, what problems does this pose going forward? This is a huge question, given the fact that the sea ice is melting and there are all these possibilities opening up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you know, the work that the IMO is doing in this space in general, I think we are generally welcome and supportive of. I would also just point to the fact that there is a lot of unknowns, and so much of this we really want to be sort of based in the science and scientific understanding. So, you know, as we think about these big picture questions that are coming up and the needs that we have, you know, how are we identifying the gaps and thinking about the science and using the scientific understanding to help drive the policy, to help drive the sort of diplomatic solutions that we're coming up with. I think that's, you know, foundational in the way in which we think about it. So,
thank you very much. And there's another question which I think is relevant for all of the panel. An all-female panel, marvellous. Where do you see the Arctic as a front runner in terms of gender equality in the maritime sector to reach sustainable goals? Have you noticed this in your work, that there are more women really involved in doing this work on the ground?
I guess, you know, this panel shows that maybe that is true. It is, you know, I think that in general, all of these issues are foundational about the sustainability, the future of our planet. I think all of us care whether or not we are, whatever gender we are, I would say. But
thank you very much. Sian, anything to add on that point?
Not really, I agree. I've been engaged in work at the IMO for 30 years or so now, and I must admit, in that framework, there has been a big change in recent years. It used to be very male-orientated. That is changing as well. But, you know, I think, as was said, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What matters is getting the right people with the right knowledge making the best decisions for the environment and for the Arctic.
State Secretary?
Thank you for allowing me to answer this question. It's, you know, just transition must also be just for genders, and the green transition must also be empowering women to take lead alongside men in the transition towards the zero-emission economy.
Okay, Charlene, the last word to you.
Thank you very much. What I have to say, and probably confirm what Sean said, that during the latest years there was a huge change of enabling women, and also the interest among women increased. So it's a huge enabling process, but we need all. It's in the end, we really need all, and what we need also to be absolutely clear that the young generation is the one that will drive the world. So we need the young people on board very much.
Well, thank you very much for all of your inputs to this panel. I really appreciate your time. So thank you very much. Sean is going to stay with us, so thank you. Great to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So if you go out this way,
yeah.
thank you
so much.
very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. So yes, Sean Pryor is going to stay on the panel. And I'm very pleased also to welcome up onto the stage Hans-Petter Næss, who's the Director of North Europe for Wärtsilä. Welcome, Hans-Petter.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Also, please welcome Roddy James, Chief Commercial Officer for the Port of Aberdeen. Welcome. Hi. And Erwin Jorde Kamsvog, who is the Chief Designer at Ulstein. Hello, Erwin. Great to meet you. Thanks very much. And just as an opening question, really, we talked about and alluded to the fact that we need innovation, of course, to try and tackle climate change. And a collaborative approach is needed. And that's what you've really been following and pushing forward, haven't you, at Wärtsilä? Just how proactive have you had to be in reach out to other parts of the industry?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. A good question, and thanks for being invited to the event. I'm representing a technology company which has been used to be working in the fossil environment for many years. And at any innovation we did in the past was how do we improve our efficiency on our, as an example, our engines. And that's how we competed with all other manufacturers on the fossil industry. So we went behind the curtain, we did some fancy things with our products, and we came out to the market and said, hey, look what we provided or what we have created. Are you interested in buying it? And that worked well until I think 2018-19, when we saw that now we have to change course. We are going into new fuels, sustainable fuels. But what fuel? That is the big question. What is the fuel of the future? And in order to prevent ourselves from going behind the scenes and develop something and bring it to the market and say, hey, look what we provided, and there is no fuel available, there's no one interested in buying it, and nobody knows what it is actually, we saw that we need to do a much more collaborative approach, inviting in for open innovation and actually start looking cross businesses, cross industries, cross borders, just to understand what is the most viable path towards a zero-emission future. So we started then inviting for future innovation days, having open discussions back in 2019. And as a spin-off of that, we created a sort of platform called SEEDS, Zero Emission Energy Distribution at Sea, which we had a formalized agreement with 5-6 Nordic companies, cross-business companies, that came together and discussed more in detail what can we do to actually achieve zero-emission shipping. And through that innovation process and that platform of collaboration, we invited in a lot of stakeholders, ports, universities, regulators, and so forth, to really sit down and share information about where we are from a technology point of view. Because I don't think the technology will be our showstopper. It's actually more the regulators or the infrastructure around these things. So we started with a different approach back in 2018-19 to more openly share where we are going from a technology point of view, and also then learn from others what is possible or what should be the safest bet on the future fuel, which I think is a hugely difficult question for the operators. So it's we have an interesting situation. We have been sort of we say we are fuel agnostic, so we don't have one fuel which we believe in. We have solutions for many various fuels. So we want to ensure flexibility for the operators going forward in a transition.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And you said that you're involving ports in your discussions, in that collaboration. Let me bring in Roddy James, Chief Commercial Officer for the Port of Aberdeen. Of course, Scotland is the most northerly non-Arctic nation. What are you doing right now in terms of working towards a net zero target? And how difficult is doing that when you don't know what the future is going to be in terms of the infrastructure needed?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to Tromsø. It's always nice to come to a city that makes Aberdeen look tropical. But from a port's perspective, we set out our stall quite early and set 2040 as our net zero target. UK government is 2050, Scottish government is 2045, and IMO are still talking about 2050. But our biggest challenge is that the third-party vessels that visit the port, which are also 97% of the CO2 that's produced, is not under our ownership. So that's our massive challenge. Our Scope 1's easy to do. In fact, we are pretty much finished that. And that's looking at things like putting HVO into our vessels as well as our vehicles and all our plant and equipment. Our Scope 2's are very much about providing green electricity. But the Scope 3 is where we see the biggest challenge, obviously. And so we'll work with the operators, whether that's vessel owners, whether that's the energy companies themselves, to understand what their journey going and how they're going on that journey. So that's our first part. The second part is to, obviously, future fuels. We're technically landowners. We own a big chunk of Aberdeen, and as part of that, we put the infrastructure in place to allow different types of vessels to come into the port. And at the moment, future fuels is the huge question mark. So what is that infrastructure? And to build that infrastructure behind, obviously, there's a large investment, not just from capital, but also time and having all the right permits in place, etc. And we're talking about future fuels which aren't either readily available or have different rules and regulations compared to your usual heavy oils. So I think, yeah, from our side, there's a number of massive challenges.
So let's talk about the future fuels and future technology. Irvin, what are you working on right now and the designs that you've been working on, the most exciting ones recently? And how does that play into these points that the other panelists are making about this kind of uncertainty? Because there are so many exciting options, I suppose.
First and foremost, most honored to be invited to such an important venue, so thank you for that. Most interesting innovations right now, where should I start? Our goal is to push the envelope, as May has pointed out. And also, we have challenges when it comes to alternative fuels, new fuels, where to start, where to stop. And we always see the challenge around infrastructure. Every single time we see the problem with the infrastructure. So for us now, we have, the last couple of years, focused more and more on an even alternative energy source, which is nuclear power. And I hate using the word nuclear power because once you mention the word nuclear, the sky is colored red. So every debate around that domain will always be colored red. So I would like to prefer to call it heat battery. So in the future, I will call it a heat battery. So we're focusing much on using heat batteries in our concepts right now, in addition to working on ships powered by ammonia and hydrogen. And we appreciate the efforts that we all do to try to make things greener, but we also see that the lack of infrastructure makes things really not efficient. So we have to think differently. We easily end up in greenwashing. And I would say that the rainforest and the Arctic, it doesn't care about greenwashing and buying CO2 quotas. It relates to deliveries, actual deliveries. So we are now developing scenarios in an infrastructure relating to the shipping part that we are involved in, where we actually think zero emission as a total concept. So looking at infrastructures in and around the ship vessel itself being either a first responder or an enabler for full electric operations or whatever. But right now, it's the heat battery that focuses or keeps it most focused.
So there's a question that's come in. Is nuclear energy the future for fuel for shipping then? Heat battery, nuclear, heat battery.
There will be an energy mix. I don't think that you will exclude any of these. There will be fossil fuels in any way, shape, or form for any foreseeable future anyway. But I do think that for some areas, for some applications, a heat battery would be the right choice. And we try to focus more on the Gen 4 reactors, or preferably the molten salt reactors. And that's because you have a higher thermal efficiency, and you also have the entire reactant which is available to that process. You can use the entire lifetime of that process, which is a lot more efficient as compared to a Gen 4 normal technology reactor.
So, Roddy, let me bring you in. What challenges does that pose for you at the Port of Aberdeen, not least for the local community? The thought that you may have a heat battery, nuclear ship, rocking up to the port. How easy would that be for you to gain approval and support?
Just touching on one of the points, because there's so many different variations in vessels, I think what we'll see is lots of different technologies for lots of different types of vessels. And it also depends on the journeys they're taking and where they're going, be it the Arctic or back south, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from that side, we see around about 7,000 vessels a year, and that's about 45% of all of Scotland's shipping. So if you can imagine, and the other part is that we're a trust port, so we actually are set up by an act of Parliament in the 60s, and we're run by a board. We have no shareholders, which is nice in some respects, so every penny we earn gets put back into the facility, which allows us to do some of the fun things that we're doing to invest in technology and in innovation. But as part of that, the community is one of our biggest stakeholders. And we have regular meetings with them, and I'll say literally on a monthly basis, to give them an update on what we're doing as a port to support either future fuels or some of the other big topics that are out there at the moment, like ScotWind and how we're the renewable energy and the shift from fossil fuels through to renewables. So I think community engagement and getting them bought into the idea is key. We're just about to build a hydrogen plant in Aberdeen, which is quite close to a town. So you can imagine what engagement you need. Everybody always thinks about a big airship that blew up, and that's the image they have about hydrogen. So I think if you attack it early and allow them or the whole community to come together and ask the questions, then it's an easier path and get them bought into what you're trying to do.
Thank you. So, Hans-Petter, what are ship owners telling you about their willingness to adapt to new technologies and fuels? Is there a risk about being a first mover here? You often talk about having first mover advantage, but could you have first mover disadvantage?
Yeah, that's a question we face very often, because I think decisions on investments today, which is a ship will last for 30 years. So the investment you do today needs to be sort of future-proof. And then selecting for a single fuel today, which you don't know the price, the value, the volume, the availability in the future is extremely difficult. So there are a few bets now ongoing. Some customers, they are betting on methanol as a fuel. Some customers are betting on ammonia as a fuel. We even have hydrogen as an alternative. And from our point of view, we are supporting all these fuels with the technology that we are supplying. But I realize the decision-making from the customers, that must be extremely difficult, because especially if you trade globally, but if you are trading locally or within given routes or within what we call a green corridor, it would be more easy, I think, because then it's a few more preset sort of agreed fuels that you can use, and the trade within that route would be more predictable.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a question that's come through about the efficiency of heat batteries. It might have increased dramatically over the past few decades, but should it be a major part of the green transition when the material sources are finite and waste disposal remains an unsolved challenge?
Well, I mean, you need to compare apples and apples and pears. And an MSR reactor compared to a high pressurized reactor is very different when it comes to both operation, challenges, and waste. So the way we see it now is that the modern heat battery are actually quite efficient, and using the system as we're currently developing it, we see a high efficiency as compared to both diesel engines and other alternatives. So, I mean, it takes a while for us to get to the point where we can implement it into a ship directly. I would assume 10 years plus minus, give or take. But we see that once this is up and running, we can have a really good, efficient operation for all our ships that have these systems implemented. That being said, we see that the public domain often thinks of reactors as a part of the dangers revolving the nuclear bomb and all these items that you often relate to. This is not the case in this type of technology. The MSR, the molten salt reactor, uses a low-grade plutonium as a spark plug on a low-pressure coolant liquid circuit, so that it's like running your everyday commuter car. So the technology is very different, and we need to be able to compare apples and apples, which is key in this
Well,
case.
let me bring in Sian. I mean, you've been listening to this. It does seem as though we need some kind of vision for Arctic shipping. You know, what is needed on a global scale that then will then play into that? Because if we have all these different operators, innovators going off in different directions, it's going to be very hard to be able to create the infrastructure to propel this kind of green acceleration that we need.
It's certainly a big challenge, and it's not just a challenge for the shipping sector, because it's a challenge for all the other sectors at the same time. So you've got the airline or the aviation industry also looking at new fuels. You've got all the land-based sectors looking at new fuels as well. And I very much agree with those that have said there's not going to be a single solution here. It's going to, I think what we need to do globally, and I think the Arctic could be a showcase for this, is look at the types of shipping, the different sectors, bearing in mind you've got small coastal ferries, small fishing vessels, you've got ships right the way up to tankers and container ships, perhaps on the long routes across the Arctic. You've also got a lot of destinational traffic that is going from one location in the Arctic and back again. And the solution is not, there's not going to be a one solution that fits all those sizes. Roddy referred to renewable electricity. How much of that could be addressed by batteries and renewable shore energy? What about wind? We've not heard anything about wind. Wind is not going to be a solution for everything, but it can wind-assisted can be a solution for some vessels, or it can be part of the solution for some vessels. And I think what we need to do is we need to take a strategic look at the whole, ideally the whole globe, but let's maybe start with the Arctic, because I think that would be slightly easier, and identify what the primary routes are, what the types of ships are, what the needs are, and then look at the infrastructure that needs to support that. We'll never know exactly what that picture is going to look like in 10 to 20 years, but I think we can probably predict what sort of 80%, maybe even 90% of it is going to be for the next 10 to 20 years. And then we can fiddle with the edges and adapt it as things move forward. But I think with a strategic approach, a shipping policy for the Arctic that is really far-sighted, we could save a lot of time and a lot of money and reduce energy.
Okay, well, thanks, Sian. And when it comes to port infrastructure, Roddy, just how important is it that there is predictability in the future framework? How crucial is it that you do have this vision?
Well, I think there's obviously the financial implications whereby, you know, for us, predictability is about demand. If you click on marine traffic today, and sadly I did, I found out there was 55 vessels in Aberdeen Port, and out of those 55 vessels, there's probably only 2 or 3 which have a future fuel in it, whether it's methanol, LNG, or even hydrogen. So if there's no demand there, it's very hard. There's about, and I'm talking specifically about the UK, there's 400 ports around the UK, 100 of them are trust ports, there's municipal ports, and there's commercial ports. And a big commercial port is not going to invest for, you know, a very small percentage of the vessels that come into port, unless there is either a standardization or a legislation change that means that every vessel that comes in has to abide by a certain level. And that's what will really drive our investment in the port. Luckily, we've set out our stall. We're going to spend about 55 million over the next 10 years, which for a port that turns over 45 million a year is a huge commitment. But the steps we'll put in place are to support those next future fuels going forward.
And do you have like cooperation with ship owners on a strategic level so that you can try and plan for the future?
Yeah, so one of the things the UK government has done is put together, one of them was the Clean Maritime Demonstration competition, and we applied for that and won funding, part funding to fund certain feasibility studies, and that's moved on to round 4 now. And as part of that, we come up with different feasibilities, and then it moves into demonstration projects. And also the recent ZEVI funding, which stands for Zero Emissions Vessel and Infrastructure. There was 10 grants put out, and we were lucky enough to win 3 of those. So we're involved with everything from electric SOVs, the service operating vessels that go out to the renewables, methanol, and we're also leading a project for shore power. So the one thing we do know is that decarbonisation is not going to be cheap. So you know, even swapping to HVO from your regular MGO is double the price. But we're willing to do that in order to cut our emissions.
Okay, Roddy, thank you. And Hans-Petter, do you think that green corridors could be the answer to this kind of indecision that we have at the moment and this kind of split in views over future fuels? Would that potentially allow for more innovation in a less risky way in terms of expense, operational expense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a green shipping corridor, of course, is then a pre-agreed route where we can link producers, vessels, ports, suppliers, and bunker facilities. So it's much more predictable for all the players in that infrastructure. And of course, adapting to then green or newer fuels makes it much more easy. Luckily, we know that in COP26, the Clydebank Declaration was signed. And in that, there were 6 global routes or global corridors defined. And of course, global corridors, then you have a lot of players that needs to be engaged and involved, and that might make it even more challenging. So we could also look at regional corridors or even national corridors. And a good example of local corridors are the development of the electrical ferries in Norway, as an example. Those are mini corridors, but they are predefined. You have to go electric, and there will be electricity on both sides of the fjord. But then it's easy to start developing technology. And already in 2015, the very first electric ferry was launched, the MS Ampere. And nowadays, I think there are almost 100 electric ferries around the Norwegian coast, which is a good example of how a predefined route with given sort of incentives accelerates technology development. So definitely corridors that will help.
It seems, from what you're all saying, that the technology is here, but then why are the timescales so long?
Economy. Everything relates to economy and predictability for the people buying the boats. If you look at the various charts coming out these day and age, you see that the contracts are not long enough in duration. They have cancellation times which are short. So it all relates to people buying the boats. And there's a risk assessment in that. So you have to mitigate the risk in the project. So every single time we see that when we design a boat and we build the boat, it all comes down to the capex of the boat, rather than actually focusing on the environment. And that's a challenge in itself. Like in the recent time, we've been involved in developing a first responder vessel for the Arctic regions, and it all came down to the cost. So they went back to the old solution rather than buying a new solution. So that's the challenge we see every single time. Predictability and long-term contracts, which is the challenge.
Well, let's listen to another question that has come from one of the Arctic committees, because there's clearly a desire amongst so many different stakeholders to try and do something to help the industry progress to be more sustainable. And I think we can play this video right now.
Hello, my name is Peter Oppenheimer, and I'm the co-chair of the Shipping Expert Group of the Arctic Council's Working Group on the protection of the Arctic marine environment, or PAIM. My question for the panel today is, what are the 2 or 3 most significant information and analysis needs for improving the safety and sustainability of Arctic shipping? Thank you.
So, a reasonably big question, but clearly one that could be very, very useful if you have more information to create the vision that you really want to see for the whole Arctic. But what information is needed for you to be able to create that vision, and who should be responsible for it?
Well, I think I'll start with the end of that first, actually. I think the Arctic Council is an obvious place for that to sit. It has the overview of the whole Arctic. It has the infrastructure through its working groups in place to develop the information, to collect the information, and to fill the gaps where information is missing, and to create a strategy for shipping in the Arctic that is based on the ports in the Arctic, but also where the ships are coming to and from beyond the Arctic as well, traveling to and from beyond the Arctic. So I think the Arctic Council is a very logical place, and through the Arctic Council, I think the countries that are important, the observer countries as well, will all have a role to play. The information is huge, it's big, but I think it's what we've been talking about. You know, it is where are the ports, what are the ports' needs, what are the shipping sector's needs, what are the different types of shipping, how is each sector expected to change over the coming 10, 20 years? Some will grow, some will not, some will even possibly decrease. And then obviously there's the financial, the economic side of it, and we need information for that as well. But without having that strategy in place, we're going to end up, I fear, going round and round in circles for the next few years, and that's what we can't afford to do. We've got to sort of put in place the short-term measures that will make a difference now as quickly as we can, so that we can plan for the longer term as well.
Thank you. Hans Petter, what information, what data would help you make the industry more sustainable?
It's a good question. I don't have a simple answer to it, but I think falling back to the discussions around corridors, I think if we would have a definition of certain corridors or information on what the needs would be, what are the players, what are the limitations and so forth, and how to navigate and operate in a safe way in the Arctic environment. I think that would be really adding value, I think, for making decisions on specific corridors.
Okay, Irvin?
Well, I can relate to that 100%. I just fully align with the 2 previous ones. For us, we represent a slightly different part of the value chain, typically. But for us as well, we need to know the limitations in the various ports around the domain, basically.
Okay, and Roddy?
It's something we've really talked a lot about, which is that predictability of demand. So if we have the data that tells us which ships are going where, then we can build our models to suit that. So I think that's a very big part of it, and obviously clarity on what fuels that people are looking at that will then drive our investment decisions. And I think that then leads to things like legislation changes as well as standardization. And if we can get to that sort of level, then I guess we can then set the scene and predict when that net zero is coming.
Yeah, so that's it, legislation changes. I mean, how do you get the political incentive, Irvin, behind the change for greener ships to try and build this momentum to shift the industry?
Well, it's about knowledge too. I mean, politicians are recruited among the public domain, and we all need more education on the matters. If you look at the various types of fuel, we build ships today with methanol, we look at hydrogen, we look at ammonia, and also nuclear. But of course, we see that all the various energy types relates to various applications. But when it comes to nuclear in particular, or heat batteries, we need knowledge. And basically what it is, it's a steam-powered ship. There's a source of heat that generates steam, that generates electricity, and this electricity is fed into batteries. So basically it's a steam electric ship, the way we operate it now. And the point about saying this is that we need to assess the risks, the perceived risks in this domain. And I think for us to be able to implement this faster, we need to have the right incentives in place, and we need the right knowledge base in place. And that's where I think the biggest Velcro is today, is basically knowledge.
And do you find the collaborative approach that you're adopting by bringing kind of cross-industry partners together is really helping with that kind of knowledge discovery and then getting that information to bring more kind of political decisions along with it?
Yeah, I think bringing all the players around the table to share information and to elaborate on possible ways towards zero-emission shipping is really adding value. Also, politicians, and we have been also active trying to meet with parliament members just to sort of showcase or give them an understanding of what's possible now, today, with today's technology. And that has actually also resulted in the Norwegian Parliament deciding that on Svalbard, which is an Arctic island, they have decided, or they have closed down the coal-fired energy plant and are now going into more sustainable fuels. But they are now in a transition period, waiting for technology that will be ready. But we have given information, and we have been sharing what would be possible in a certain time frame that helped them taking that decision. So I think working together and sharing what's possible and what's available within the given time frames, I think that is then helping also politicians to make the right decisions. But I agree also with the other speakers here that we need to work together, and we all have the same target, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And part of the issue, isn't it, is this kind of infrastructure gap. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. If you don't have the infrastructure, then you don't have the predictability and the confidence of the industry. So what needs to be done in that respect?
Well, look at the availability of alternative fuels. Going to the Arctic with hydrogen, how big would your ship need to be in order to sail independently in the Arctic regions? You would probably have to double the size of the ship just to carry the fuel around. So you will have a fuel-carrying ship. I'm not sure if that's sustainable. So I think you need to expand that infrastructure to be able to do anything. So if you look at ammonia and hydrogen, best case scenario, those fuels will be brown because the energy required to manufacture that fuel takes quite a bit of energy. And that energy is not readily available from green sources. So the challenge here is that we need to develop an infrastructure like we did in Norway for electric cars to be able to do these shifts. And that's where I think the missing link is right now. There's no plan to make the infrastructure. We have a lot of great projects in Norway when it comes to ferries going from port A to port B using hydrogen, which is fantastic. However, there needs to be a truck coming from Germany with hydrogen every 3 weeks. I'm not sure if that qualifies as infrastructure, but there's a challenge in that, right?
Absolutely. Sian, let me bring you in, sorry. From a bad moment. I was going to ask really for your perspectives on the use of kind of ammonia and hydrogen in the Arctic. Do you think it is really feasible? Do you share the same concerns?
I have concerns. Oh, sorry. I do have concerns.
I'm going to come back and...
Sorry, I do
I'm going to come back
apologise.
in 2 minutes. And we talked, Roddy, about this kind of need for public opinion, getting politicians on board, but also you've got to get the local community on board as well, haven't you? And it must be really difficult for you in so many respects because you can't give them a really clear vision, a really clear framework about what they're agreeing to. They might be considering moving to Aberdeen. They don't necessarily want to move for a job if they feel that they're going to be setting up next to a big new plant that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, so one of the things that's happening recently in Aberdeen, we've obviously built a brand new port. It's the newest in the UK. We spent around £420 million to do that, right to the south of the regular port. And as part of that, Sir Ian Wood and the Scottish Government got together to form a company, which is a not-for-profit company, to look at how they can develop the whole energy transition. And this is the vision of, I would say, Scotland and the northeast about transitioning from, being oil and gas to the renewable energy. So it's a really fantastic vision. But what I would say is that aside from the money involved to do that, it's the timescales involved. So that company was set up in 21. And we are now at a stage where planning is in place. We are the marine gateway for that. And there's an area for hydrogen, there's floating wind, there's an innovation centre, and this is all utilising the local economy and the community around about the port. So, and the challenge is, like the first point we talked about, was making sure they're engaged in that whole process. So we regularly have meetings with them to understand what is their issues and how can we deal with that going forward.
And obviously Aberdeen and the whole region around it is going through a really tricky transition period, weaning off oil and gas and trying to look for a new renewable future. Have you been surprised at how willing the local people have been to get on board this?
Not really surprised, because I think change in the Scottish attitude of getting things done is great to see. We still have our doubters. There's still a lot of people out there thinking this is the wrong way to go. But I guess Aberdeen has very much been at the heart of the oil and gas industry for the last 50 years. And the whole supply chain has grown up around in and about Aberdeen too. And I think 50,000 people in Aberdeen work specifically in what is now called the energy industry, as opposed to traditionally calling it the oil and gas. And I would say 5 years ago, that was the chosen way of thinking. It's not for us. But certainly with some of the geopolitical and some of the security issues around the globe, it's absolutely galvanized, about energy. And whether that is oil and gas, whether that is renewables, everybody's on board to make it as clean and as efficient as possible.
And certainly hosting Arctic Frontiers abroad in Aberdeen last year was really struck by the real enthusiasm and that kind of get the job done.
And the great weather.
Yes. Yeah, but it was great to see certainly how it's been
all
prepared.
the operators, you know, they're setting their scene out, their stall, and some of the obviously the biggest investors in green technologies are the traditional majors as well as some of the up and coming players. So, and that is the majority of the employees that are in the industry in Aberdeen. Absolutely.
There's a question that's come in that I'd really quite like to put to the panel. It's similar to one that was posed in the first panel as well. Given that there is clearly so much uncertainty about the kind of path ahead for green shipping and which routes we should be taking, should we even allow the opening of new shipping routes in the Arctic, which will put more pressure on this vulnerable ecosystem? What's your take on that, Sian?
It's a tricky one. There's already a lot of Arctic shipping and a lot of routes in use, and perhaps we should be trying to focus on consolidating on those routes first of all, and maybe transitioning those to the new future first before we start thinking about new routes. But we're not going to stop shipping in the Arctic. It's just not an option, even if it's only resupply to the coastal communities. It's going to have to happen. And going back to the point you tried to ask me earlier, and I do apologize for that, there's a lot of safety concerns, particularly around some of the new fuels, and we need to ensure that those are addressed, and environmental concerns around some of them too as well, and that it all needs to be addressed. So I think we need to strategize. We need to try not to do everything all at once, because we're just never going to get there. And if we could just focus on where we're at the moment, or where perhaps things are predicted to go over the next few years, that would give us a good start.
Thank you very much, Sian. And what's your take on this, given how this question is how shipping damages the environment? Should we allow the opening of new shipping routes in the Arctic? Or do you have confidence that what you're seeing in your realm of innovation, that we will get solutions to these challenges?
Definitely. I think from a technology point of view, also, as Ulstein is saying, I think we have the technology pretty much available, but it's about making decisions about infrastructure and availability of fuel and predictability for those who operate. I think that is the key to enable a sort of safe Arctic transportation as well. So definitely I think it will be something that we will see going forward. But we need to have some brave decisions made.
Okay, thank you. And what's your take on that?
I mean, the Arctic is a window for the world. So we need to be there, at least to do the research. And as long as we do it sustainably, I think shipping should be in that region anyway. But I think When looking at a ship and ship design, thinking holistically, designing a ship not only using fuel and emitting carbon emissions, but thinking what's the right size, a right sizing of a ship, and then using the proper fuel and using that fuel efficient, and then also reusing the excess energy on board the vessel in a proper way so that you have a lower impact from the vessel in itself. Like, for instance, in 2007, using off-the-shelf hardware, or designing a ship and building a ship for the offshore industry, we lowered the fuel consumption for that vessel in its operation between 50 and 70% compared to a similar type ship, meaning that there are possibilities in improving the existing fleet as well. So, I mean, there will be a stepwise approach to the zero emission case.
But do you think as well we have to realise that, you know, in many ways that we've asked for compromises elsewhere in this big debate about, you know, natural resource management, that the industry itself has to make compromises and realise that perhaps it can't do everything that it used to in the past?
Absolutely. We need to. I mean, we all have luxuries in our lives that we take for granted. I can order things in China using a click of a button. Should we be able to do that? Or should we think, you know, shorter routes, other type of logistics, other ways of living? So, I mean, the questions could be massive if you so choose to expand it. But yes, we need to do the compromises.
And Roddy, you alluded to that, the very fact that, you know, with the new security world, it presents different types of challenges to ports. And obviously, with what we're seeing within the Red Sea, for example, fresh potential fracture of supply chains, will that have implications perhaps for nearshoring? And could that present further difficulties for you? And also maybe the types of ships that actually would serve your port?
Yeah, we're already seeing issues from what's been happening in other regions. And I think 95% of the world's goods travel by vessel. So I think just to say, right, we're not going to do that is quite a bold statement. I think we have to look at ways that protect, and it's not just about emissions, security is one piece, biodiversity, there's a whole picture that we need to look at and to make sure we are, and not just ticking the boxes, protecting, and obviously the Arctic is an absolute diamond in the world, and we need to make sure that that is continually held for years to come. So I think there's just a lot of things that we need to look at as the whole pieces in the pie.
Certainly do. Well, thank you very much to you all. It's been a great discussion, and I really do thank you for your thoughts and your insights and your vision, and let's hope that we do get that bold one at some point. So please do give the panel a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel and to all the participants for another important session on the complexity of the Arctic and how we need to think critically and outside the box when we think about the future of the Arctic. What I haven't heard, though, was much about artificial intelligence and Arctic shipping. But we have an entire session on artificial intelligence tomorrow, big picture. And if you want to hear already some insights on AI before, there's a side event right after the coffee break, among many other side events. If you want to do a quiz tonight, 6 p.m., come back here, the Blue Economy quiz, focusing more on food in the Arctic. And of course, we hope you will join us at 8 p.m. at Radisson Blu for our main reception. So you have to face the weather and move a few meters to another hotel, 8 p.m. at Radisson. Until then, thank you very much and enjoy the coffee break.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
To me, coexistence means being at the same time and in the same space with other human and non-human entities without compromising each other's existence. And yes, I do believe that I have a role in ensuring coexistence in the Arctic. I'm coming from Russia and I'm studying Arctic issues in Norway, so I believe that I'm bringing together different perspectives, both on academic and on personal level. And I hope that my research on mobilities and security in a changing Arctic will contribute to the resilient and sustainable development of the Arctic region.
Hi, my name is Puya. And to me, coexistence is the ability of different groups to exist together in a region or a union in a mutually beneficial way. The Arctic is one of these regions, where indigenous peoples, industry, Westphalian governments, and various ecosystems all exist together in the Arctic region. I help ensure coexistence in the Arctic through writing and volunteering, and through keeping in touch with people I lived and worked with in the Yukon.
To me, coexistence is cooperation and compromise. We all are working towards the same goal, sustainability, so we can continue to profit from the ocean and create value for society. Coexistence ensures the fair distribution of resources, economic gains, as well as the responsibilities. And yes, in my life, I am ensuring coexistence in the Arctic, especially with my current PhD work, in which I am mapping out which industries are operating where in the Arctic to better understand their effect on the distribution of economically valuable species. My goal is to make sure we are coexisting in a manner that can be continued sustainably for years to come, and I plan to continue weaving that goal throughout my future career.